I'm Lucy Rychetnik, exploring the climate change impacts on Australia's largest city, Sydney. The city was established at the end of the 18th century on the lands of the indigenous Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Today, Sydney is a thriving international metropolis. The mostly migrant population are over 5 million people, with 40% of whom speak a language other than English at home. The Greater Sydney area extends from the Pacific Ocean all the way through to the Blue Mountains 50 kilometres to the west, in between are low-lying plains with higher plateaus to the north and south of the Sydney Basin. Sydney's urban sprawl covers nearly 2,000 square kilometres. It's also surrounded by extensive bushland conservation areas and national parks, shown in pink, as well as grazing areas, shown in yellow, and forestry, shown in green. Several river systems run through the metropolitan areas and feed into the main Sydney Harbour and Botany Bay to its south, which is Sydney's main cargo port and the site of Sydney's International Airport. The city has over 70 harbour and coastal beaches, and the Sydney property market is one of the most expensive in the world, with the richest properties built along the waterlines of the city's harbours, bays and estuaries. The Sydney climate is humid subtropical, with temperatures strongly moderated by proximity to the ocean. Coastal temperatures range from an average of around 15 degrees centigrade in the winter to 25 degrees in summer. The western suburbs and higher plateaus tend to be hotter in summer and colder in winter by several degrees. And higher townships, such as in the Blue Mountains, may even get a few days of winter sleet and snow. However, like the rest of Australia, Sydney weather is variable and significantly influenced by the El Niño Southern Oscillation. The negative phase of the Enso cycle, El Niño, occurs every 3 to 8 years and generally results in below-average rainfall over much of eastern Australia, including Sydney. The positive phase, La Niña, generally results in above-average rainfall. On average, Sydney gets around 1,200 millimetres of rain per year. But even during the neutral phase of the Enso cycle, this varies throughout the year. February is usually the wettest, with an average of around 130 millimetres, and the cooler winter months in the middle of the year are significantly drier. The western Sydney plains tend to have less rain than on the coast and in the plateaus. And Sydney also has around 20 thunderstorms a year. Sydney is highly prone to severe weather. East coast lows bring heavy rain, strong gusty winds and high seas. These can form at any time, but are most common during autumn and winter, and while they may last only a few days, they can cause significant damage in very short periods of time from fallen trees and flash flooding. In 1986, Sydney was deluged with a record of 330 millimetres of rain in 24 hours. In 1999, huge hailstones led to insurance losses of nearly $2 billion. It is very common and almost an annual experience to have some form of localised flash flooding in this city. Sydney is also prone to severe heat waves and periods of drought. Australia's average winter temperatures have already increased by about 1 degree centigrade since 1910. Winter warm spells are lasting longer, occurring more often and becoming more intense. Before considering some of the predicted changes to Sydney's climate, it's worthwhile noting that since the 5th assessment report in 2013, Australia has continued to experience record-breaking summer and winter temperatures. The summer of 2013 and 14 was the driest in 72 years, and Australian and Sydney temperature records continued to be broken throughout 2016 and 2017, with mean summer temperatures 2.8 degrees above average in Sydney. Australia's capital, Canberra, just 3 hours over the border, had its driest June on record, and the nation as a whole experienced its second driest June on record. The Sydney Basin also experiences regular bushfires, which are exacerbated by long, hot, dry periods. The bushfires affect the national parks and conservation areas surrounding the city and their many neighbouring suburbs. Some of the worst bushfires on record occurred in the Blue Mountains in 2013. I will now explore some of the available climate change predictions for 2030 for the East Coast cluster of the Sydney region. It's been predicted with very high confidence that Sydney will experience continued and substantial warming. A mean temperature increase of between 0.4 and 1.3 degrees centigrade is predicted, and only minor differences between the different RCPs. Also predicted with high confidence are hotter maximum daytime temperatures and the frequency with which these will occur. Significantly, more recent projections based on modelling conducted by the Australian National University has predicted that daytime temperatures of 50 degrees centigrade are possible in Sydney by 2040. It is predicted with high confidence that the Enso cycle will remain the main driver of changes to annual and seasonal rainfall in the next few decades. However, there is high confidence that the intensity of rainfall events will increase, although the magnitude and timing of these events can't be projected. The frequency of extreme droughts is predicted to increase by 2030 for all RCP categories, as shown here in green, blue and purple, and compared to the natural variability shown in grey. There is also high confidence of increasingly harsher fire weather, but there's also low confidence in the magnitude of this change due to the significant uncertainties in the rainfall projections. There is high confidence that sea level will continue to rise in the next century. Up to 2030, the projected sea level rise is 0.14 metres, with only minor differences between the RCPs. However, as can be seen here, the longer-term projections suggest far more significant impacts by 2050 and the end of the century. There is very high confidence that the ocean around Australia will continue to become more acidic, and also high confidence that the rate of acidification will be proportional to carbon dioxide emissions. By 2030, pH is projected to fall by up to additional 0.8 units in the coastal waters of the cluster. As a large international city, Sydney has a degree of economic resilience, but some of its inherent vulnerabilities will contribute to the economic and social costs arising from climate change. Extreme heat has serious, even fatal impacts for anyone without means to cool down, particularly for the elderly and very young. The average air temperatures in large cities may also be several degrees hotter than surrounding areas. Extreme heat events will overburden emergency services, health systems and electricity supplies. For example, Sydney's electricity grid is linked to other parts of the eastern seaboard, and the current system has very limited capacity to meet large spikes in demand. The state of New South Wales only just avoided widespread blackouts in the recent heat waves, and a major expansion is required in the capacity to respond to surges in demand, particularly as the Australian population is expected to grow from 24 to 40 million by 2050, and a large proportion will be in Sydney. Sydney's public transport system also struggles under the strain of extreme heat events. Many bus and train routes have insufficient or even non-existent air conditioning. More heat events will increase the frequency of electrical faults, signal failures and buckling rail tracks. The Sydney area is particularly susceptible to the growing bushfire risk due to its proximity to the extensive bushlands and natural forests in the Sydney Basin, and its many leafy suburbs with large, beautiful but highly flammable trees, particularly the common eucalypts. In terms of water supplies, continued droughts pose less of immediate concerns for Sydney due to its backup desalination plant, which was built in 2010 following a period of extended drought. Intensive rains are likely to be an escalating problem for suburbs with insufficient stormwater drains and close to Sydney's many rivers and estuaries, where the combination of king tides and torrential rain create backflows in the linked drain and river systems. More frequent flooding will affect property values and insurance premiums, or even the ability to obtain insurance, and will further challenge the volunteer-based state emergency services. In terms of sea level rise, it is significant that key parts of Sydney are only a few metres above sea level, and 2 of the 3 runways for Sydney's International Airport extend into the low-lying Botany Bay. While sea level rise predictions are imprecise, this Carbon Central tool predicts that a global temperature rise of only 0.5 degree centigrade would cause flooding to many harbourside areas, including the International Airport. As Australia's financial centre, Sydney will also be directly and indirectly affected by the costs and longer-term economic implications of heat, drought and coastal flooding in the rest of Australia. The 2013-14 heat waves cost the Australian economy around $8 billion through absenteeism and falls in work productivity alone. The cost of bushfires around Australia were estimated in 2013 to be $300 million per year. This value was expected to increase to $800 million per year by 2050. The loss of the Great Barrier Reef is also an ecological and financial disaster for Australia. And finally, despite being one of the driest continents on Earth, Australia is a major agricultural producer and exporter. Any increase in drought and heat extremes poses significant longer-term challenges for the Australian economy and for national food security.